System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' inner city left.
Inner City Left, Mean TMK, Emoji Lil Tanky, Sumler. Today is Friday, May 31st. We just finished up a podcast with Keita DeMuscle as well this
Man, it's
past
always
week.
great to have her.
Yeah, and I think we touched on a lot of things that we're going to touch on today. So go back and check that out if you haven't already. We are on YouTube and wherever you find podcasts. Tanky, let's talk a little bit about what's going on this week. As we see, there is now a blockade around Taiwan. We talked about this during our geopolitical flashpoint conversation. What is the latest, and how do you react to China being, surrounding the Taiwan island?
You hear a lot about what China did, right? And to be fair, the blockade ended about a day ago. They utilized over 40 ships, and what they did was they surrounded Taiwan, a nation, an area, a region that the United Nations, the United States, and China all recognize as part of China, right? Um, so that's something that happened. But you don't hear a lot about the provocations that are happening in the region. Like, for example, there is a Shangri-La conference right now where there are a lot of the Southeastern Asian governments, and for some reason, the United States of America are there, and they talk about, defensive arrangements. They talk about treaties. They talk about, they try to talk about potential flashpoints and how they can have better cooperation between the militaries in that area. Well, this is one of the first times that America has talked to China and vice versa on a military level in almost 2 years. It hasn't been since 2022 that they've spoken, right? And the thing that's interesting to remember about that is what comes out of the executive office is not always the same thing that comes out of the Pentagon, because politicians have different inherent they have different motivations than the military. The military knows what it can achieve and what it cannot achieve. Politicians promise you, cherry cola is going to come out of the fountains. They can say whatever, but the military has to be able to deliver. So the fact that Lloyd had a conversation with his Chinese counterpart tells me how serious it is right now. But both parties walked away saying that it was a constructive conversation. But while we're hearing about these blockades, what you don't hear about is like the Chinese military officially condemned the United States deployment of previously banned missile systems that they're keeping in the Philippines. Like there was an intermediate nuclear missile ban that for a long time that Russia and the Americans were honoring. Well, the Americans pulled out of it in 2019. And one of these systems is called like the Typhoon, and it's made to look like a 40-foot shipping container. So you can have it ostensibly on any kind of regular looking ship, and it fires a Tomahawk cruise missile. Like they stored these in the Philippines. Like you have to understand these are the kind of things that they're doing to provoke China, because ostensibly what you're saying is we want the ability to make regular ships look like military ships to look like they're regular ships. This leads to all of the conflicts that you're seeing in the South China Seas right now, where the Philippines are like, oh, these are fishermen boats. But at the same time, the Chinese military is aware that the United States has deployed this missile system that, again, can be nuclear tipped, by the way. Like, you don't even know that it's a military vessel, and ta-da, it's a nuclear tipped Tomahawk missile that comes out of there in an emergency situation.
And the Filipino president, Marcos, he came out and he had during this Shangri-La conference, and he was a little bit escalatory on China, saying that that I had a quote here. I want to see if I thought I had it, but basically it was saying Like if they continue to engage with the Philippine ships, it could turn up as well. And again, we always talk about how Marcos Jr. is so closely allied to the West, and they're all sort of building up on this. I wanted to ask you too because the Indonesian president was also there. Indonesia is the most populous Muslim country in the world. They've spoken out at Palestine and things of that nature. What how do you see their participation, and where does sort of Indonesia's look go in all this?
Well, I want to speak on the Philippines first. Marcos, the thing to remember about him is he wants to accrue wealth. He is a good and proper capitalist. Nothing would make him happier than to be able to do all the business in the world he wants to do with China and all the business he wants to do with the West. He wants to, like, that was what I took away from his Shangri-La speech was like, oh, I don't appreciate that in this great powers competition, we're being forced to make a decision as to which side. Is like, just say you want to get your bread butter on both sides, bro. I
He
mean,
wants that Erdogan treatment.
I was gonna say he's the Erdogan of Asia, of far
Yeah.
Asia, easily. Absolutely. But these are real provocations, right? These are real provocations. And this is not unlike what we're seeing even in the Russian theater, right? Just to pivot slightly, because what's happening, right? One of the things that happened over the past 2 weeks, there was a huge Russian incursion, about 300,000 new soldiers that had not been committed, okay, to the battlefield. In addition to all of the forces that are already in the contested areas, what they say old Russia and new Russia. And in 3 days, this Russian force took 880 square kilometers of new gains, right? So a lot of people are like, well, what happened? Well, the reality is, and they've been talking about this for a long time, the border forces had been sent into the front. The border forces are all out there already fighting. So what you had on the line, it's being rumored now, were a bunch of NATO forces, right? And they didn't have the order to fire into Russia proper, which is now why you have all of these heads of state from France to Germany, even Joey B, now saying it's okay to strike inside of what is considered old Russia now, right? And Putin has responded. Putin has straight up said anybody that utilizes these systems against us will be considered co-belligerents. Because at what point, right, does the proxy stop being the proxy, right? We're talking about the what was the ship, the fabled ship of Theseus or whatever, where like it's been in the museum so long and you've had to replace all the boards to the point whereas all the boards on the ship have been replaced. When does the ship stop? That's where we're at in the Ukrainian war now, right? Like the Ukrainians are out of men. They're literally NATO advisors, right? Manning artillery, manning these weapon systems. And when you're no longer a Ukrainian at all and are in de facto a NATO soldier firing into Russia, what are Russia's obligations? Like Putin has spoken extensively over the fact that he's going to see these as straight up attacks on his land from the countries of origin. This is very dangerous because over the past 2 weeks, there's been a concerted effort to damage Russian early observable nuclear satellite radars, right? Like these are incredibly provocative acts as NATO begins to openly admit they will fire missiles into Russia, right? Coupled with the fact that this is now more than ever the time that you're starting to see the F-16 conversation reassert itself. And what is that about, right? The F-16 is a platform that is capable of delivering nuclear missiles, should it be so given the order and armed.
Yeah, and it's so interesting just how much you can we have a discussion about China and it goes into Russia, and we've talked about this before, but because these conflicts in Taiwan and Philippines and Russia. We are now hearing information that maybe Afghanis and Uzbekis will also be participating against a campaign against the West, possibly.
And that's
Um,
terrifying. That you're talking about some of the most powerful fighters in the world, cultures of fighting, people that have fought the American Special Forces for decades, right? Who maybe have an axe to grind, now being in a military alliance with Russia de facto, with Kyrgyzstan, with all of the ex splinters of the Soviet republics, right? Still working in concert for each other's mutual protection. Like NATO acts like Russia stands alone, and NATO never stood alone. Like I'm sorry, Russia never stood alone. They assume all of the help has to come from China, or that somehow China is cheating. These are how these these conversations are linked, because even at the Shangri-La dialogue, right? The number one thing Lloyd is saying to his Chinese counterpart is, you guys are giving Russia dual use weapons, and that's why, there might be what's that language? Consequences, right? The greatest threat of all time. If you don't do this, there will be consequences. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you, right? Like you could take it however you want. And this all of that ties right back to Russia, when the reality is Russia is meeting its own material needs and still has great relations with its ex-Soviet satellite nation states. From
yeah,
Kyrgyzstan to Uzbekistan to Turkmenistan, they're all in economic cooperation. They're all Belt and Road partners. Many of them are part of the Shanghai cooperative, right? So, like, you have all of these natural ties that bring them together anyway.
yeah. I think it's interesting. You see this happening. You see this happened already in the Donbass area. You have the Soviet Union, um, you know, uh, coming down and turning into so many different nations. But as we saw in eastern Ukraine, those people still identify with Soviet roots and Russian roots. Which again, I mean, Russia's a very old place,
Right.
and the culture goes back, and we even talked about this with weapon systems, how the weapon systems are very different for Western systems and the Russian systems. Again, I think it's just always a question of what we. It's so funny you mentioned this, because there's like this meme all the time where it's like, "Hey, stop giving Russia weapons so we can help Russia defeat you, or we help us defeat Russia, and then they won't be able to help you defeat us."
That's
You know,
exactly the thing, and everybody
and
understands.
everyone knows it.
It's an existential dilemma for everyone that the West has decided is othered right now, right? Never mind the fact that they're also putting themselves in this position of heroism for the global majority to see, right? Like, you can stand up against them. Something else that's really important to acknowledge right now is China is having a forum where the president of Lebanon is there. The king of Bahrain is there. The president Sisi of Egypt is there. All of these Arab leaders are there, and they're discussing what peace looks like in the Middle East for the next 10 to 20 years. Like, who's not there? NATO countries. You know who's not there? EU countries. You know who's not there? The United States, right? Who's not there? Israel. It's not there. Like, these are people that are making decisions that would have never happened before. Saudi Arabia is there, right? Where you sit down and you start to look at what the framework looks like in a post United States hegemony, where you're able to talk about plans of what prosperity looks like for your nation for the next 5 to 10 years. Oh, and also what statehood for Palestine looks like, right? Without the dishonest broker of the United States, right? And of course, these
Or the
countries,
uselessness of the UN or ICC or ICJ, or insert whatever you want.
I feel like this is one of the things that I hear the most, especially from leftists online, is like, oh, the Arab nations will never do anything. That, if only that their heart matched the heart of the Arab street. And the reality is, when you run a state, your obligation is to the continuation of the state. Taking on the United States and Israel militarily is not the safest thing you can do to ensure the continuation of your state. And
And
it's not like,
what I don't like about it personally is it takes the onus off of the United States and Israel, and Europe, who is backing this and creating this and making this very difficult situation for Arab leaders. Anyway, I just wanted to jump in and say that because I don't think it's unfair.
and when we're talking about a crime against humanity, what gives Arabs, right, the moral, the only moral onus, right? We're talking about a crime against humanity, right? We don't know what'll happen, okay, if the Egyptian army decides to open up a port of their own, open up a border crossing to feed Palestinians, whatever. In fact, we pretty much do know what will happen, okay? But what about a nation like France that claims to have a commitment to human rights? What about a country like Germany that claims to have a, a tradition of trying to atone for the genocides of their past? Right? You're seeing this thing happen, right? So why are these navies not going to Gaza? I mean, are you afraid the Israelis will fire on the French? Are you afraid? You know what I'm saying? So, like, as opposed to saying, why aren't the Saudis attacking Israel? Why isn't Egypt or Turkey, right? Ask yourself, why isn't the United States, they built a port that sunk into the sea. Surely the United States isn't going to be fired on by the Israelis again, right? I mean, we've had a liberty, but would they do it again, right? What about a British armada? What about a Spanish armada? Why did these European nations not take it upon themselves to break the siege, just like what happened for Germany, when they were blockaded by the Soviets? No one air flew in all of these, and I don't mean these ceremonial things where the United States goes in and they drop a bunch of expired MREs into the Mediterranean Ocean. You know what I'm saying? But a sustained effort to make sure that people that were not associated with militants at all were fed, while the militants went out and did their thing. So it shows once again that even the rhetoric of the West is hollow.
Let's get out of here on this one. I would be remiss not to have this conversation and this dialogue. Former President Donny J. Trump, convicted on all 34 counts, over 34, a true slump. What's your reaction to this?
It's sensational. It's not shocking. This is but again, right? I wonder to what end, right? I'm not shocked that he was was doing these things. I'm mildly surprised a court of law found him guilty because of the inherent implication of the questions that raises as to how does the state move forward. But again, it goes back to our earlier statement about the state attempting to metastasize, right? The state sees Trump as something that's uncontrollable, something that has to be neutered, cut off, isolated, right? This is not about liking Trump or not liking Trump. This is recognizing the chaos he brings to the system. And this is a system that will defend itself violently if it needs to, right? Um, it's interesting to see what will happen. I'm quite the things that impressed me about it, if anything, was the fact that it was a jury trial. So now you lose the ability to say, "Oh, this judge hated me." This is not a judge. These are 12 Americans. That your legal team had a crack at saying, "No, not this guy," and they kept him. These are people that your legal team were totally okay with, and those people came back with a jury that was disfavorable to your client. So there's those things. But I mean, this in this case in particular was problematic to begin with because we're talking about consensual sexuality between adults, which is something that I just don't have an interest in. I just don't care what two grown adults do. And everything that ties to that becomes some variation of it. Well, he did it and he lied. So, I mean, I just don't care. Um, it's unfortunate that this is the thing that America has found out of all of Trump's acts to be a crime worth punishing. But in a puritanical society, that those things make sense too, right? Like sex is not meant to be this thing, this thing that Trump makes it, and um, and this is part of his cult of personality. He's going to have to rationalize. The thing is, the evangelicals, they a long time ago stopped caring about the morality of candidates, and they started looking at, do they deliver us the results that we want? And as it relates to his commitment to Israel, he's never been stronger. So he'll never lose the evangelical vote. I mean, this is a man that ostensibly has had abortions, but people that are staunchly anti-abortion 100% believe in him. So even a conviction of something like this, it doesn't damage him with his base. It just opens up really kind of very interesting legal, we're in a new ground where a person that could ostensibly be in jail could be elected the president, right? Which in and of itself is a fascinating and provocative concept. um One of the things I see immediately happening, and it's what happens with liberals, is once again they're weaponizing the word felon, they're weaponizing the word convict, um, because they once again have to show they're tough on crime, right? They're anti-crime. When again, this could become a conversation about what are the roles that the incarcerated in America still have to play in the political movements moving forward, because these are still human beings and ostensibly have considerations about how a country should be run. It raises implications about what a person from prison can still do, right? The fact that a person that's a felon can't even vote in many parts of the country, but we have a person that is now ostensibly a felon that might be the president. I mean, these are things that are just interesting to me from an American point of view, right? Just because it's new ground. But everything that deals with the Trump machine is spectacle. And this is spectacle too. This allows him to once again be a victim. Um, because he gets to be like, oh my God, look at it. They're just mad that I had sex with this beautiful woman and they're punishing me. Don't
Yeah, and
you?
it seems like I don't quite like the longest this has ever been. This particular offense, the falsifying of the documents or lying, whatever it was, it's only been 4 years, and most people get off with a fine or probation or whatever it may be. So, like, regardless, it's not going to affect his status for running for president. And it's so interesting how they always bring out these people to say, "Shame on you, Trump. You're bad. You're a felon now." No, you're right.
Trump
No one's
can't
going to care
shame.
about that.
Like Trump is a person that doesn't work within the framework of shame. So that's already an ineffective weapon to use against your enemy. And the thing is, it's not going to motivate people or demotivate people at the polls. The last poll I looked at had Trump up 55% to Biden 35%, and that much of America undecided. I mean, the real story is there's never been a better opportunity for a third party candidate to really make a splash. And I think it represents a huge opportunity for organizing, both on the extreme right and the extreme left, right? I mean, you're seeing libertarians do better organizing than almost ever you've seen. You see leftists, you see Green Party, you see Socialist of America really out there trying to put out candidates that have platforms that they stand for. And I think, if anything, that's the only real maybe takeaway from this spectacle of an American election system. And
Yeah.
then, they're saying that Biden is going to have the Democratic Party. It's going to be all online. It's going to be
Yeah.
like a Zoom meeting, like because he doesn't want to be around crowds.
They act like, oh, Trump, it's incredible. Wow, it's something that's never happened before. Oh, and you're right. I mean, didn't Andrew Jackson like kill people, and like didn't Thomas Jefferson like enslave people that he was sexually assaulting? Like, I mean, yeah, I get all this, but also we're also seeing in the Biden administration things that are happening that have never happened before. We're seeing the slide into this sort of authoritarian neoliberal ideas and feelings and neocon values that we're seeing kind of permeate through
You have to protect
America.
from your radical idealism. That's neoliberalism. I mean, that's what it is. It's better that the fascists win than you communists, right? I mean, that's the face of neoliberalism, right? I mean, you cannot accurately describe from a policy point of view anymore what makes Joe Biden effectively to the left of 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 Trump. I mean, you just cannot. As far as his foreign policy, he was willing to literally arm neo Nazis. He has funded a genocide. He's courting World War III with both Russia and China. I mean, if this is your idea of leftism, I don't think you understand what leftism really is as a philosophy.
Just want to give a shout out to our Patreon members, Paula, Lissa, Lauren, Suzette, and Dennis. We're on YouTube. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Player FM. All the places that you find podcasts. InnerCityLeft.com. Any other thoughts before we get out of here, Tanky?
Be safe.
System riding to the core. Yeah. Reppin' inner city love.